We're joined now by Ralph Garman, voiceover, impressionist. He's done TV, and of course, he'll be coming to town for Hollywood Babble On with Kevin Smith at the Pageant. Ralph Garman, thanks very much for joining us today.
James, thanks for having me, sir.
Absolutely. So we'll start with the transition from radio to the Ralph Report. What kind of culture shock was that like? Obviously, many aspects are the same, but you're doing a lot of the heavy lifting yourself these days. How have you found it to be?
Yeah, after doing, 18 years of morning radio here in Los Angeles, that job went away. Sadly, as many do in radio. And I was left on my own, and I said, I'm going to start doing a daily show of my own. And I started doing it on Patreon.com as a podcast. And you're right, there is a steep learning curve when you're used to working in radio with a crew of people who help you out with editing and sound effects and production and all that stuff. When you're doing it all by yourself, it's a bit of a task, but I'm having the time.
And I follow you on Instagram, and I saw some of your posts there. Obviously, you are also a huge comic book fan. I've seen pictures of you with Hawkgirl cosplays and Black Panther. What have you thought of the new slew of comic book movies we've been treated to in the past 10 years?
Well, you get good ones and we get bad ones, right? Like any genre. Although I think Marvel is just doing it right. I mean, even the worst Marvel film is entertaining, and then the worst DC film is, unwatchable. So I think Marvel has the formula.
And with the Ralph Report, you've got access. Obviously, I've got to beg and plead to get people. You've been very kind. Thank you, by the way, for joining us on air. But you can just reach out and say, hey, Seth MacFarlane, want to be on air with us? Hey, Kevin Smith, come over. So that's got to be, I would assume, it makes your job easier, obviously, when you've got such fantastic guests who you can tap into. Yeah,
the one upside of the Ralph Report for me has been, unlike radio where you're kind of limited to your time, how long you can talk to someone, I sat down with, Jimmy Kimmel, and we sat down for over an hour and talked. And then, you're right, I had Kevin on, of course, as a guest. And, geez, I have somebody, John Cryer, and so many great other friends of mine who are willing to come over. I got Dave Grohl from Foo Fighters coming up, Seth, as you mentioned, MacFarlane's coming on next month. So it's nice to do a long-form interview and really get into some conversation, and then, I break that up and play it throughout the week. But it's really been a blast.
And you've got the Patreon account, which a lot of people have jumped on. Again, you've had that background. You were kind of an established person, so I'm sure that helped a lot with that kind of a thing. But with Patreon, do you have, like you just said, it's a long form. Do you give bonus content out as part of your Patreon if people want to subscribe?
I do, yeah. One of the higher tiers of the subscription base is I give them the entire uncut interview so they can listen to it at their leisure, and a lot of people like that. In this fast-paced social media world, we don't get a lot of, in-depth conversation anymore, so people really seem to be enjoying it.
And with the podcasts that you've been doing, with going half hour, 5 days a week, I have trouble. I do a show once a week for an hour, and I sometimes have trouble coming up with content. So is it ever a challenge for you at all?
Not really, because I can go on. I'm known to speak at length, and I like to focus a lot on pop culture and current events of the day. So as you know, every day there's something new to talk about. And then I've got the guests, as you mentioned, and we've got some recurring segments that we do. I do a segment on one-hit wonders throughout the history of music. And it's just, we're having a blast, and people really seem to be responding.
And then, as we mentioned, Hollywood Babble On with Kevin Smith, which will be coming to town here at the Pageant, coming up very quickly here. With all the show, Kevin Smith, I mean, he had the AMC Comic Book Man, which sadly just got canceled, but he does the Jay and Silent Bob Get Old. The guy does more live shows and has podcasts than I've had hot dinners in my life. Having someone like that to tap into as well, what is the difference between having his presence versus doing your own Ralph Report?
Well, Kevin and I have been doing Hollywood Babble On now for over 8 years, and it's always been in front of a live audience. We've always planned to do it as a live show. So when we're on stage together, although we are doing a podcast, we're also doing a live comedy show, and there's a lot of live elements in it as well. There's videos and pictures and jingles that go along for the recurring segments. It's really become an interactive fan experience that we just love doing live. And we like to feel when we're on stage that we're like a comedy team as much as we are a podcast team. So we have just a great time going back and forth and making each other laugh and hopefully making the audience laugh as well. It's really one of the joys of my life is doing that show with Kevin on a weekly basis usually, but we've missed a couple of weeks lately because Kevin's been up in Vancouver directing a new Supergirl episode. So we're looking forward to getting back on the stage. It'll be the first time in about a month we've done the show when we hit the pageant there in St. Louis, so we're looking forward to it.
Obviously, though, having done it for 8 years, I'm sure it's even taking a month off, you don't miss a beat when you guys get back together.
No, and we're such good friends, too. When we see each other, we immediately fall back into that rhythm, and I think St. Louis is really going to be a particularly fun show because, like I said, we haven't done it in a month, and we're jonesing to get on stage and do what we do, so the energy is going to be great.
And we talked a little bit before we started the interview. You've not been to St. Louis before. This is your first visit, so welcome.
Thank you so much.
Is there anything, I know Kevin's been through town before, has he told you anything like you have to go to Gus's Pretzels or anything like, has he given you the lowdown on what you guys have to do while you're here?
What is it with Gus's? He did mention that. Is that like a famous pretzel place?
It is. He went there. He went there while he was in town back in April for his Jay and Silent Bob Get Old tour, and he brought it up on. I saw both nights of his show when he came to town, and he mentioned Gus's Pretzels. I was like, these pretzels are amazing. So
well, I'm going to have to check it out because he did in fact mention that to me. It's funny you said that, but I'm going to try Gus's. I'm just looking forward to hanging out there at the Del Mar Loop. It just seems like such a cool area.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool things to see and do. St. Louis is such a microcosm. You like go down to the hill if you want Italian food. Downtown is a lot of restaurants, and then Del Mar Loop is almost a new thing unto itself. So it's a great area. So I think you'll have a lot of fun when you get here.
Can't wait.
And Family Guy coming up. You're still working on Family Guy. That's got to be with the people you're working with: Seth MacFarlane, Seth Green, Mila Kunis. What an incredible group! And I love how back when they first came out, they were canceled, and the fan demand and the DVD sales forced Fox to kind of bring it back. So it's so cool that you're included in this legacy of this amazing show.
It is sort of unique in that way that it got canceled, as you mentioned, and then came back in such a strong way. And now it's been, I think we're in season 17 now, I think. But yeah, we just came back. The season just came back. Second episode was this past Sunday night. And it's been a great season for me. I got a lot of fun stuff to do. I already play Brian's landlord. He's moved out of the Griffin's house. He's in his own apartment, so I play his landlord, Lou, this season. And Peter will also be taking a new job at some point in the season as communications director for President Donald Trump, and I get to play the president. So I couldn't ask for more fun this season. Seth has been very good to me.
So doing the impressions that you do, how did you get started doing impressions? Because I always talk to impressionists, and they always have different stories about how they got into it, how they got started, and how it kind of blossomed.
You know, for me, it was a party trick. I would do it for my friends in elementary school, to try to make milk come out of their nose. I'd do impressions of cartoon characters or our teachers or whatever. So I never dawned on me in a million years I would use it in any kind of professional manner. But it's funny, Seth called me up about this season. He said, you do Trump, right? Let me hear a little bit. I was like, Seth, I have to tell you, you're doing an amazing job. Super, really, really huge show you got there on Fox. I love Fox News. And so he said, all right, you're in. So it's going to be fun this year.
And with the impressions, are there any that you've worked on that you're like, you struggle with? Because I know sometimes it's the voice, it's the inflection, it's the cadence. Are there any that you kind of are trying to do, trying to still branch out and get certain ones that you're having trouble with?
For 8 years, I tried to do President Obama, and I could just never nail it down. I ended up slipping into Bill Clinton all the time because their cadence was kind of similar. President Obama would talk like this, and it would be very clipped sometimes. And then eventually I start doing this, and then I sound like Bill Clinton. I couldn't help myself. So it's always a challenge, but it's so much fun.
I'm naturally Scottish. When I try to do an Irish accent, it usually kind of falls into Scotch after a while. So it's never a good thing.
Accents can be tough.
And with the live shows you guys do, having the background as an actor, a comedian, I'm from an improv background as well, and I love that live interaction with the audience, a non-scripted thing. That's got to be so freeing, I would think, to not have to worry about following a set script.
It is awesome. When we do Hollywood Babble On, I prepare the show. You know, we don't write anything, but I do prepare. We do, talk about the entertainment news of the week, and we have emailers who are listeners who suggest segments they'd like to hear, or perhaps a voice or two they'd like to hear me do. And so I sort of collate all that information and narrow it down into a show, and then I bring it to the theater. And then Kevin and I just show up, we get on stage, and we just launch into it. So we don't prepare anything in terms of what we do. And so it's all improvised, and we end up, I think, laughing as much as the audience does, because we're such great pals, and we just make each other laugh.
And my executive producer, Joey V., he told me that he actually got some art on your show at one point.
He did?
Yeah, it's a real honor to know that you have thousands of people, I assume, watching your show, and I'm just listening at home on a podcast, and I know that you're doing a little slideshow with my artwork or some movie poster I submitted, so it's a real
What did you submit, Joey?
Oh, it was years ago where, in Clerks 2, they were talking about never going, let's say, butt to mouth. I came up with a movie poster called Astopus, where you and Kevin were on a sci-fi original called Astopus. And
that's very funny. An homage, of course, to my legendary film Sharktopus. I tell you, so much of the show is generated by fan content and listener content that really the show would be half as long if we didn't have folks like yourself who were kind enough to submit their stuff. And we've got people who have submitted the jingles that we use for our recurring segments. As Joey mentioned, they send in artwork all the time. They send in videos. It's so much fun to cull through all of that material and come up with these great things that the audience provides.
And as a pop culture junkie yourself, what podcasts do you listen to? Are there any out there that stand out?
Well, James, I do a daily podcast that's an hour every morning, Monday through Friday, and then I work on a Hollywood Babble On show that we do almost every weekend. So I don't have time to do my podcast, let alone listen to anyone else's podcast.
I was just kind of curious because sometimes I feel the same way. I'll try to listen to as many as I can if I'm in the car or something like that, but there's so much content out there.
Yeah. Honestly, I do like About Last Night. My buddy Brad Williams, the comedian, does one that I really enjoy. Mark Maron I listen to when I get the chance. So I tend to skew more towards comedians and interview stuff.
We've had Michael Rosenbaum on the show before, and he has his Inside of You podcast, which I've liked that one quite a bit as well. My wife listens to Anna Faris's podcast, and I said something about a podcast that I had. She goes, well, I didn't hear that. I'm like, how are you listening to all these other podcasts and you're not even listening to my radio show?
Trust me, my wife never listened to mine either, but now she's part of the Ralph Report, so she's got her own segments, and now she loves it.
Well, yeah, maybe I need to give my wife her own segment. Maybe then she
That's
would.
That's what it is. Get her involved.
With the podcast and the radio background, you just mentioned you're very busy. Is there anything that you'd kind of like is on your wish list, on your bucket list, things that you'd like to? Hey, I still want to try this. With everything else you're doing, I can't imagine you have the time, but certainly there must be that next benchmark you're shooting for.
Well, the one upside of losing my job on the radio was that it's kind of freed up my schedule. Now, the work that I do, I'm probably busier now, but I get to sort of manage my own time. And so I'm getting to do more acting. I'll be doing a feature film next year, and Kevin's got some stuff coming up. We did a TV show called Hollywood together. We're going to be shooting more episodes of that. So that has all been blessed, but I would like to get back on the stage and do a play or a musical or something like that at some point before it's all over.
What was the last play or musical that you did?
I can't even remember. That's how long it's been.
How long?
Yeah. Probably when I first moved to Los Angeles in the 90s. So, it's been a long time. But I sort of cut my teeth on musical theater when I was a kid in high school and college doing the classic musicals and stuff like that. And that's just so much fun. I'd love to get back to that and do one more.
See, I played in the pit orchestra for the musicals when I was in high school, and I didn't actually get into the acting stuff till I was in college. And I wish I'd done more with it earlier on. So that's always kind of, once you get a taste of being on stage, you kind of never want to let that go. But you get that every time you get to do a Hollywood Babble On or one of your live shows. Exactly.
I get to scratch that itch, and the audiences are amazing, and it's also interactive. It's just a pleasure, and plus, over 8 years now, we are popular enough with people that we can travel to a nice place like St. Louis, or we're going to Canada. We've got trips planned really around the world the next year or so. So it's just it's a dream come true.
And for those of you listening, there are still tickets available. If you're in the St. Louis area, you want to come over, it's thepageant.com. The Hollywood Babble On with Kevin Smith and Ralph Garman. You can buy your tickets right there on the website. With the traveling, how does that affect your schedule when you're doing Family Guy? How far out do you record those? I guess you kind of are able to work around things based on what you're doing with that.
Yeah, they're great schedule-wise. They let me sort of come into the studio when I can. And if I get in there once a week, they can have my stuff prepared. And, you know, a lot of people don't realize when you do an animated show, you're not in the recording booth with the other actors, and you're not sort of reading it together the way you would a play or shooting a movie or TV show. You go in there and you record your stuff in isolation, and then they kind of edit it all together after the fact. So because of that, I can step into the booth and record a whole episode's worth of dialogue, just my stuff, you know, in a couple hours. So schedule-wise, it's pretty easy to work out.
And I'm a huge fan of voiceover. We've had almost the entire cast of the Justice League, Kevin Conroy, George Newbern, Susan Eisenberg have all been on. And they've talked about before, Kevin Conroy specifically said it's kind of lonely when you're doing like a video game where you're just doing a thing, you're in the booth by yourself, where like Bex Taylor Klaus and Josh Keaton doing Voltron, where they're all kind of there interacting. There's a different energy. But I guess that's just the nature of the beast for voiceover these days.
It's just because of scheduling, they just sort of have to do it that way. It's so hard to get everyone together at one time because everyone's doing a million different things. But the fun stuff, when I started on Family Guy, Seth would direct almost every episode himself. So he would jump into the booth with you, and you'd be standing there next to Stewie and Brian and Quagmire all at the same time. And it was always amazing to watch those voices come out of him in such rapid succession. He's so gifted.
And I suppose if you're doing those takes with someone else, I'm sure that you got to hold for laughter, because I can't imagine doing a voiceover with the cast of Family Guy and not cracking up and having to stop for to recompose yourself.
And the material too is just so funny. Every time I get a script, it's so I can't wait to crack it open because I just love what they're doing.
So Ralph Garman, we do want to mention again at the Pageant, if you want to get your tickets to see him and Kevin Smith do the Hollywood Babble On, the Ralph Report, just the Ralph Report. If they want to do the Patreon, that's the best way to get those episodes. Yes.
Yes, they can go to patreon.com/The Ralph Report, and once they sign up, they have access to all the backlog. We've been doing it since January, so it was about 9 months of good stuff in there.
Fantastic. Well, we'll look forward to keeping up with you and seeing what you have coming out next.
James, thank you so much. What a pleasure.
Thank you, Ralph Garman.